Hey guys, it's Chris from Steeda, and today we're going to take control of your S197 Mustang with both front, rear, upper, lower control arms all over the place. We're going to dive into a product review, and then after that we'll do an installation on how to get them all installed, and then a before and after of this car on a slalom. Did I mention 260,000 miles, bone stock suspension? This thing was all over the place. Then we'll do an after segment at 240 frames per second slow motion. So without further ado, let's dive in. Today we're going to take control of your S197 Mustang by talking control arms. We have the front lower control arms with the X5 extended ball joints. We have a Bumpsteer Kit, the rear billet lower control arms, and an adjustable upper control arm, all to dial in and get that power to the ground on your S197 Mustang. Now, these bushings from the factory on your 2005 to 2010 Mustang do have a tendency to go bad. It's a good idea to stick your head under the car, check and make sure those bushings are intact. If they're not, then this is the perfect replacement part for you, because you not only get to replace those bushings, it's an easy drop-in installation, and you have the extended ball joints, which are perfect if you plan to lower your car or if your car is already lowered. Keeping on the topic of the front suspension of your S197 Mustang, we have our Bumpsteer Kit. Now, bump steer happens when you've lowered your vehicle and the steering rod and the control arm are two different angles. When you go over a bump, it actually slightly changes the toe of your tires and can send your car, or the tires rather, kind of going in different directions. You feel this when you go over a bridge joint and the steering wheel kind of shakes a little bit. This bump steer kit solves that and allows you to line everything correctly to get rid of that bump steer. Next up, moving to the rear of the Mustang, we have these billet lower control arms. They're obviously non-adjustable. They're going to save you 6 pounds over the factory lower control arms, and they're going to look good doing it. By installing these billet lower control arms, you will reduce wheel hop, increase traction, save 6 pounds. It's really a no-brainer. Last but not least, the adjustable upper control arm. We went with the adjustable option here because we needed to set the pinion angle correctly with the rest of the driveline when we're on the alignment rack. It includes a polyurethane bushing, which not only is a little bit stiffer than stock, but doesn't increase NVH and helps you get that power where it needs to go to the ground. The best part about all these parts is they do include our lifetime warranty. They've been competition proven. I promise you, we have thrown these on our S197 Mustang project cars and beat the absolute crap out of them. So we know that these will stand the test of time when you install them on your vehicle. All right, so we have a long installation ahead of us. So buckle up and we'll get wrenching. So kicking off the lower control arm and bump steer kit installation, I'll be honest, it's a little difficult, so we'll step by step get through it all, and then you'll get a better gauge on whether or not you can handle this on your own or you want to take it to a local shop. First things first, we're going to go ahead and turn the wheel, and it may be locked in the inside, so you may need to turn the ignition, unlock the steering wheel so you can get it all the way over, but we've already done that, so go ahead and turn everything over to the right-hand side. Then at that point, we're going to start with our bump steer kit. All right, a pair of needle nose pliers and side cutters. Go ahead and bend these nice and straight. Go ahead and pull them out. At that point, you're ready to get the castle nut off. 18 millimeter. It's actually not that tight on there. Before you're ready to get this ball joint out of here, you're going to want to go ahead and loosen that lock nut on the tie rod right here. Need to get enough grip on here just to go ahead and loosen this lock nut. Just a turn or two off of the tie rod end. It's So now you're ready to hammer this guy out. Notice we actually had some grease, I guess from the last time it was filled, maybe a little overfilled. So you don't drive it out, you're gonna hit it on the side of the knuckle. Carefully go ahead and take this guy off. Tell this one's a little messy. Ready for the trash can. Go ahead and clean this up. You got your Bumpsteer Kit. You have your nut on the top as well as the washer. Now here's where the spacers are aligned. This is kind of how we do it. Now if the alignment shop needs to move this up or down, they will go ahead and take it apart and adjust spacers as needed. But the idea is this is tapered, so you're gonna tap it up into place, get this washer and nut on, and you're good to go. Might help to get the steering wheel a little bit straighter. You have to go to the other side of the car to do that, so it pulls the steering rack over. Through. All right, and at this point, once you have it up into place, go ahead and start tightening her down. And once you have the bump steer installed, you're ready to take care of the lower control arm. This is probably the hardest part of the front installation on this vehicle, but we'll take it a step at a time. I'm gonna go ahead and turn that steering wheel now all the way to the other side of the car. That's gonna allow you enough room to get on the back side of this bolt to the K-member. We'll go ahead and start and take the easy stuff off. You have this heat shield on the top of the bushing in the back side of the lower control arm. Go ahead and take that off first, and we'll go from there. This here is an 8mm socket, and you have three, one on top and two on the inside. Kind of a pain in the butt to get to. One thing to note is this is a really common issue on 05 to 10 Mustangs. This particular bushing right here. They go bad after a long time if you race the car, if you don't do the proper maintenance. So definitely a bushing to keep an eye on. That's why we have developed this lower control arm with our extended ball joint built in. That way, if your vehicle's lowered, like a lot of people who are doing suspension things on these cars, you'll be able to drop it right in. Don't need to worry about pressing ball joints and all that kind of stuff. Next up, you have where the ball joint meets the spindle on the lower control arm. There's a bolt holding that together. You want to go ahead and remove the nut off that bolt and then hammer the bolt out. It's an 18mm socket. It's gonna go ahead and spin on the other side, so you need a wrench. 15mm on the back side, the head of the bolt. Go ahead and remove it here. And set that nut aside. See if we can get this out. Oh, look at that. Comes right out. Keep that nut and bolt together so you don't lose track of it. So this is probably the hardest part of the installation when it comes to the lower control arm, getting this ball joint out of the bottom of the spindle. So a pry bar, a big hammer, You'll be able to get it out, it's just gonna take some work. So once you have the ball joint out, you can go ahead and turn the wheel to the other side of the car. That's going to give you access to getting this bolt out that's holding the lower control arm to the K-member. The reason for that is you have the boot for the steering rack. Otherwise, you would need to take the steering rack off in order to get that bolt out, but get that boot all the way to the inside of the car, you'll be able to get that bolt out. You don't need to worry about the nut on the back side as it's welded on. Fair warning, this one's a little bit hard to get off. I won't want to take that bolt all the way out quite yet, as the ball joint's already loose. You want to kind of keep everything as straight as possible before you're ready to pull it out. So we have a 21 millimeter here. The only way to get on it is a wrench. Can't get a socket in there. I tried, trust me. Unfortunately, I don't have a ratcheting wrench, so we're gonna have to do it the old-fashioned way. Get this guy off. Woo! Put that nut back on, keep it aside. Now we're going to the inside. This is a great example. I'm pretty sure these are the factory bushings on this car, given that it does have 260,000 miles. I'm surprised at how good a condition they are in, but look at it. You got dry rotting, some cracking in here. This is why these bushings need replaced, and the easiest way to do that is to do the whole lower control arm and get this thing out, swap a new Steeda one in with our extended ball joint. All right, next up, you're ready to finally take your lower control arm out. You have both of these bolts out, ball joints pulled out, so you're literally just hanging on by a couple threads, literally, on the inside here. So you should be able to wiggle this bolt out. Watch the steering rack boot. If you have this turned all the way to the right, you should be able to finagle it out. And if worse comes to worse, you can pull the boot off, pull that boot back, give yourself a little bit extra room to pull this guy out. Throw this in the dumpster. As you can see with our control arm, we already have the extended ball joint pressed in, ready to go. We're gonna go ahead and place it in the car. Same way you took the other one out. All right, odds have it, if it was a tight fit coming out, it's probably a tight fit going in, especially in the center section here. So grab a hammering, you might be able to. And careful not to hit the ball joint. Get it kind of spun into place. Now, when it comes to that lower control arm, I'll be honest, it's a little bit of a bear to get in. Once you got the old one out, everything kind of fits together like a puzzle going back in. So you want to make sure everything kind of lines up. If you finagle it, take your time, you'll be able to get everything in. It just may take a minute. And this one down first, there's no need to get a nut on the other side since it's welded to the K-member. All right, next up, you got a 15 on the back side here. Just kind of want to hold it into place because it is going to spin. Then you have an 18 on the front for the nut. A 21 millimeter wrench. If you have a ratcheting wrench, unlike us, this will be a lot quicker. But you'll know once it's bottomed out. That's it. Grease fittings that are included in the box with the lower control arms with the extended ball joint. I'm going to go ahead and put these up into place. It's easiest to install them once they're already on the car. So go ahead and install these guys up in place. Get them hand tight. Under the car, you're pretty much done. You just want to go ahead and make sure everything's tight and you're ready to move on to the rear. Moving on to the rear with the lower control arms and upper control arm installation, first thing you want to do is take care of this parking brake. All right, first thing you want to do is remove this retaining clip on the bottom of the parking brake assembly. Comes off pretty easy. Go ahead and set that aside. Then, pry the parking brake back. Find a good place to pry. There it is. You get it out of this bracket. On the bottom, comes loose at the top, and at that point, everything's loose. You can pull this out, and your parking brake's free. You can go ahead and do the same thing on the other side. So first thing we want to do here is take some weight off of this lower control arm. So grab the pull jack, jack up the axle tube here. All right, next up, before you grab your wrench, just go ahead and pull that parking brake through and get it put off to the side. Then, your 18 millimeter wrench. There's a flag nut on the outside, and I don't know what this is, but you don't need to put a wrench on the inside here. So you're gonna unbolt here and unbolt over here. We'll go ahead and leave that in for now. Take the flag nut off. All right. You can set the flag nut aside. This one's for the rear. And we'll do the same thing. Another 18 millimeter. we're ready to set the wrench down here and pull the factory lower control arm out. This is for the front, and this is for the rear. Rear comes out first, then you pull the front. Here's your factory lower control arm. Stamped steel. Excited to put some billet goodness in there. At this point, you want to go ahead and grab your Steeda billet lower control arm. Got to grease all the bushings before they go in. There's a series of washers. Don't let that intimidate you. We'll walk it through and show you how to install it in the car. Take the washers off, snip the zip tie, and you want to go ahead and get a good amount of grease on all of these bushings. If you don't grease these bushings up, it's possible that they could squeak when you're driving, and that is quite annoying. I'd highly recommend grabbing a glove when you grease these up, because this lifetime grease is quite difficult to get off your hands. The gold washer is going to go on the outside of the chassis mount on the front of the lower control arm. The grease can kind of act as a glue to hold that in there. The skinnier aluminum washer goes on the outside of the axle mount. And we're going to go ahead and flip this over. Continue greasing everything up. It's the reason why we include 2 grease packets here. You really should use almost a full grease packet on one lower control arm. And the thicker washer, aluminum one, goes over here. And at this point, you're ready to install it in the car. Once you have everything greased up, you're ready to put it in the car. Keep in mind, like I said, the thin aluminum spacer is going to go on the back towards the outside of the car. The thicker aluminum spacer is going to go towards the back on the inside of the car. And this gold steel washer will go on the front towards the outside of the car. One thing to note, this is much lighter than the factory stamped steel and stronger since it's billet aluminum. Grab your back bolt. Again, we're just kind of putting this up into place. All right, we'll go ahead and put the front in first. May need a screwdriver to help that washer into place. Line the bolt up. Get it started on the other side. Then, you go ahead and put the front up into place. And sometimes you might need to widen the gap here in order to get things to line up. And at this point, you want to grab a hammer, something that, like a rubber mallet that won't damage the billet aluminum. Start getting it up into place. Things are pretty close. And kind of take a screwdriver, stick it in there, and manipulate it to where you need it to go. Get your bolt. Oh, we are so close. Get your flag nut and your 18mm wrench. Oops, wrong side. And get it started. It'll come up and Rest against the axle tube. Perfect. Go ahead and do the same thing up here. So at this point, you want to take your parking brake cable, just like you did with the factory control arm, kind of set it up into place. At this point, you can lower the car and take care of connecting the parking brake back the way you took it apart. Then add the zip tie around there just as an added, safety benefit to keep that parking brake in place. And then repeat the process on the other side, and we're ready to move the upper control arm. So first thing you want to do when you're removing the upper control arm is take the back seat out. It's actually not that hard, believe it or not. There's a plastic push tab on either side. You can feel it right here and right here. Go ahead and pull the seat out. Carefully remove it so you can get access to the upper control arm bolt. All right, and then once you have the rear seat out, you grab your 18mm socket and impact if you have it, pull her out. All right, next up, you're gonna loosen the gas tank and drop it just so you can get access to the upper control arm and the bracket up there. It's a T50 Torx, so grab yourself a long extension. Make sure you have the gas tank supported. We have a transmission jack here to do that. There's one, and the other. Next up, we're going to go ahead and remove this nut here on connecting the differential to the upper control arm. You want to make sure you have a pull jack under the front end of the differential before you loosen this bolt. Deep well, 21mm. Next up, you want to go ahead and remove those two bolts holding the bracket to the floor of the vehicle. You'll need to get your extension again. And at this point, you're ready to take out this factory upper control arm. Trying not to scratch up this brand new panhard bar. This is why it's important to check your upper control arm bushings, because this is completely separated and cracked all the way through, which means this bushing is not doing its job anymore. Same thing on the other side as well. At this point, if you aren't picking up the adjustable upper link bracket from Steeda, you want to go ahead and take off the upper control arm from the factory bracket so you can reuse it with our upper control arm. You want to go ahead and get a 21mm deep well, and that'll take it off. 18mm wrench on the other side. Next up, you want to take your factory upper control arm and your Steeda adjustable upper control arm and make sure that these holes and these holes line up in terms of length. Now, when it comes to adjusting your pinion angle, you can rely on the alignment shop to do that once it's on the car and everything's getting squared away. Now you're ready to grease up your bushings. All right, everyone's favorite part, greasing up the bushings. Again, I really highly suggest grabbing a glove to get this thing done because it's lifetime grease and it'll stick around for a lifetime. Ooh, there's some dirt in there, we'll get that out. Do the same thing for the other side. All right, so we include a series of washers. The little ones go on the outside of the factory bracket. Then you have these, which go up against either side of the bushing. Go ahead and put it up into place. May need to do one side at a time. And then slide this guy into place. That way it goes all the way through. And again, you're using our Steeda supplied hardware for this. Now keep in mind, this is the way that's going to go up into the car. This flat round side is going to be aiming upwards, as is the open side of our upper control arm. We have this wall here on the bottom. That's going to be facing down when it's installed into the car. Next up, in order to torque this thing down, you want to grab a 7/8 wrench and a 7/8 deep impact socket to go along with your torque wrench. Torque spec for this is 129 foot-pounds. You're ready to install it in the car. All right, at this point, we're ready to put the upper control arm and the bracket into place once we have this torqued. So we're gonna go ahead and put this part up into the rear seat area. The nub, spacer, whatever you wanna call it, goes up into the rear seat area with this wall on the back of the upper control arm aiming up. I'm gonna grab your 2 bolts to hold the bracket into place and get them started by hand. There's a lot of Loctite on them, so you can only do so much. So at this point, we're ready to torque them down. Now with one hand, you got your impact. Your other hand, you're going to want to push the back side of the bracket up into the floor to make sure it doesn't tighten cockeyed. All right, once you have the upper control arm on top of the differential in place, you're ready to take your bolt and nut that came off of the factory control arm and slide it through. Sometimes you may need to stick a screwdriver in there to straighten things out. There it goes, okay. So in order to get it into place, you may need to move the differential up or down a little bit. Now keep in mind there's a flag on the head side of this bolt, but it's got nothing to catch anymore. It was catching on the factory upper control arm. So you're gonna have to get an 18mm wrench to go along with your impact to hold the bolt in place. Now we tighten up the gas tank, and after that we go into the rear seat. All right, at this point, you're ready to go ahead and put the gas tank back up into place. Doesn't take much. Try to get them started by hand. That way you don't cross thread anything. Go ahead and tighten things down. So if you look in the hole here where you pulled out this bolt earlier, you can see that nub on the upper control arm or spacer that's coming right up to the bottom of the body here. So you just start it by hand. Everything is going in fine. Now it's time to crank down on it. Let's go ahead and reinstall the back seat. Go ahead and pull the seat belts through. Make sure they come up through the seat cushion. There's one. Sometimes they like to get in there. And there's the other. Perfect. Perfect. Once you have that down, everything kind of falls into place and you hear click on both sides. And your installation's complete. This car was totally unsorted when it started out. The ball joints were shot. This thing was ready for some Steeda suspension. It's obvious that looking at that slalom side by side, you can see the car is much more sorted. I was able to take that slalom at much quicker speeds and it just felt better overall. The data speaks for itself. Just check out those videos, but aside from that, you can't go wrong by especially that front lower control arm. That's definitely something that needs to be checked on a regular basis with these body style Mustangs. So if you want to show your S197 some love, go ahead and visit us at Steeda.com. Go ahead and comment below. Let us know what you think of how this whole installation and the slow motion and everything else turned out and what parts you plan to add to your S197 Mustang. Go ahead and hit like and subscribe and that notification bell if you want to see more cool Ford and Mustang content. And don't forget the most important thing, speed matters.